Excellent, thank you. So good morning and good afternoon to all of you from UNESCO Paris. We are very happy to welcome you to the sixth and the last edition of UNESCO series of regional expert consultations against gender stereotypes with the aim to change mindsets and norms. And today we are focusing on the Arab region. I am Anna Maria Mailöv and I work for the Inclusion and Rights section at UNESCO. Let me first remind you that English and Arabic translation is available. You just have to click on the globe below on your screen. Since this is the last consultation, let me also thank most warmheartedly all the interpreters and the technicians who have been with us for a month. You have been wonderful. Let me now introduce you to Mrs. Gabriela Ramos, who is our Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences. And she is going to deliver the opening remarks and also set the agenda. And she will be followed by our moderator and consultant, Mr. Tim Shand, who is the co-founder of and director of Shand Clark Consulting and also an expert on gender masculinities and harmful stereotypes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Maria, and again, good morning. Is great to have you with us. As Anna Maria said, this is the last consultation, and the focus, of course, is on how to eliminate stereotypes, biases, and cultural institutional norms that are really producing the kind of outcomes that we are experiencing. Not only in terms of general challenge that we have on gender equality, but also linked to COVID, that had really become a mirror in which we see ourselves with all the vulnerabilities, but also with all the gaps that now are just exploding in terms of gender equality. And whenever in UNESCO, whenever we want to learn and whenever we want to build a strong program, we call on bright friends like Tim, but also we call on you. We call on you to help us to dissect the problem, to understand it better, and more importantly, to rely on your experience on how we can build proposals that can change the outcomes. And so I want to thank Aminetu, I want to thank Anmar, Anya, Muad, and Salma for joining us today. And this is an urgent call. This is an urgent call. As I said, the pandemic has just exacerbated the impact that the inequalities that were built before the pandemic and now are delivering a very uneven situation, not only because these stereotypes put women in charge of the care economy, and of course they are fighting the pandemic because they're 70% of the health workforces, but they are also taking care of the schools, and they're taking care of the children at home or the homeschooling. And on top, they are being very harmed with the sectors that are more affected by the pandemic, which are actually where women are overrepresented, which are the services and restoration and culture, arts, air trafficking. But on top, and you know it, because we have been making a call in the United Nations system, but also in UNESCO, the horrific pandemic of men's violence against women, domestic violence that had increased everywhere from 20% to 72%. And so it's just, we're getting used to these numbers, but it's just a dramatic human failure to have this as an outcome of the confinement, of the stress, I agree, but then that reaffirms the way some men perceive women as something they can just hurt. And so this is something we want to ensure we address, but we also want to go into many other areas where we could really work with our member countries, build up a strong agenda to advance gender equality, particularly this year when we are talking about the generation equality that is going to be delivered in France and in Mexico. So what happened in your region? Well, you know better, but I also have my experts that put some figures that are important to remind. According to UN Women, 37% of Arab women have experienced some form of violence in their lifetime. These are indicators, but there are indicators that the percentage might be higher, because we all know that these also go unreported. We all know that this is a crime that is tolerated. I don't know of any other crime that is tolerated by the institutions that are supposed to fight it. And we know it. There is no gender sensitivity in the police force. There is no gender sensitivity in many of the institutions that are in charge to fight this pandemic. And therefore, we need to take a look at that too. Violence against girls and women are structural and reinforced by these gender and cultural norms and the stereotypes that fosters the inequalities. And this is why in some countries in the region, rapists can show leniency or even be acquainted if they marry the victims. And I think this is an horrific outcome for any women, but that's a rule. And I feel that it is for those also to take a look at unfair rules and unfair laws. In some other countries, 92% of women or girls between 15 and 49 years old have experienced female genital mutilation. And last year, on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, UNESCO organized a high-level roundtable with messages from renowned leaders, and we launched the call to action for member states to scale up the efforts to eliminate violence against women. And we call it today by asking you to support UNESCO in this task and join a wide network of role models and leaders, because everything starts in the mindset, and then everything really needs to be addressed at that level. Of course, with all the tools that we have, with all the governance infrastructure that we have, but first and foremost, we need to change the mindset. Last year's in the G20 Leaders Summit that took place in Riyadh under the terrible auspices of the pandemic, there were some interesting outcomes to empower women and girls and to ensure prosperity for all. But this is a call that I used to be the Sherpa of the OECD to the G20, and I was always glad that we were able to have a gender chapter every year in the summit and every year in the G20 works. But it's fine to have commitments and it's fine to have agreements. It's much better to deliver. And I think this is another angle that I want to put at the table. I would like you to help us to also see how can we deliver and how can we change. I was working with the Tunisian minister 2 years ago to repel these terrible laws on the rapists marrying their victims, or the laws that just do not allow women to inherit, or the laws that simply do not allow women to have independence of any kind, to work or to go out or to study. And therefore, I feel that there is also this movement that you also have fostered as experts and as people that have a voice in the region that is moving, and therefore we need to build on it to advance better representation and to fill the gaps, because you also know that women in the Arab region have the lowest share of participation in the labor market with 15.5%. And only 11% of women fill managerial position, a percentage almost 3 times lower than the world average of 27%. And everything starts with economic autonomy. You cannot escape violence if you don't have anywhere to go, or you don't have any strength to manage your own life. So I think that this is a very important aspect that we should also take into account. And so these are some of the elements. The consultation will help us draw a roadmap that will guide the directions and interventions of our coming flagship against gender stereotypes that will both examine and eliminate the origins and consequences of harmful gender stereotypes so that they no longer hold sway in our lives and successes. We have seen it now with all this hope that was built by having the first female vice president that is not only a woman, but is also a Black woman in the US. I still remember when there were elections in Germany, when a young German girl told me that she didn't think a man could be a chancellor because the only image she had was of a women chancellor. And so this is the kind of reflections that we need to have. How do we foster this mindset? How do we change the rules, the cultural norms, and how do we ensure that we do not advance, for example, in the digital world, just reproducing the gaps? And that's why we're also proud at UNESCO in working on a recommendation on ethics of artificial intelligence, again, to ensure that at least we cut them at the crossing whenever these biases are showing their ugly face, and that we are able to put the rules and the norms to advance a more equal world. So thank you again for joining us. This is a huge effort, but we feel strong when we have all the experiences that is around this digital roundtable. So thanks a lot and looking forward to your conversation.
Gabriela, thank you so much. And thanks for your continuation of inspiring remarks every consultation. And as both Gabriela and Ana Maria said, this is the last conversation as part of this series, but by far certainly not the least. And we're really excited to be exploring these issues within the Arab region. Let me just say a couple of words about the format, and then I'll introduce the panel. So we'll begin first with a video message that we're very pleased that we are able to share. And then I'll have an interactive dialogue with the panelists on a number of questions touching on the issues that Gabriela has just outlined. And then we'll have question and answer from the participants. And we've got about 50 participants at the moment, and hopefully we'll have more, but we'll really seek to have an interactive conversation with everyone. And then we'll go back to each of the panelists to talk about recommendations for UNESCO and next steps. And I'm really pleased also that then we'll have Yana Baba from UNESCO in Cairo, who will give us some closing remarks before I sum up the consultation. So great, we have a super group of people, a fantastic panel that I'm really grateful that have taken time to speak to us today. Let me introduce them all to you. Aminetu Bilal is Technical Advisor in charge of communication at the Ministry of Social Affairs, Child and Family of Mauritania. She's an activist for women's and youth empowerment, a young expert from the Africa Union and European Union, and president of the Selfie Balit Association, a Mauritanian NGO that promotes ecological development. Anmar Khalid is a human rights activist and international coordinator of Y-Peer International Network, a youth-led network working on sexual and reproductive health and rights. He has over 10 years experience, Anmar, over 10 years experience on youth participation and leadership on peace building and gender equality, and is a member of the Generation Equality Youth Task Force in Iraq. Hanai Shulkami is Associate Professor in the Social Research Center at American University in Cairo. She has spent a decade working on social protection issues and has piloted cash transfer programs in her capacity as Special Advisor to the Egyptian Minister of Social Solidarity. She was a visiting professor at American University in Beirut, the Arab Gulf University in Bahrain, and Yale University. Salma Yard is influencing and gender coordinator working with both Oxfam Tunisia and Oxfam Egypt. Her work focuses on fighting inequality, promoting women's transformative leadership, and amplifying the voices of women's rights defenders in Africa and the Middle East. She also works to advance Oxfam's work on digital activism and the feminist economy. and Dr. Alanud Al-Shakare is a researcher on youth and gender demographics, GCC security, bicultural trends, and a specialist on Arab feminist theory and advocate for women's rights in Kuwait. She's currently a research associate with the Chatham House and the Arab Gulf Institute in Washington, and is an outspoken advocate for women and minority rights in Kuwait. What a wonderful panel we have. Thank you all again. I'm really delighted that we can now introduce the video message, which is from Dr. Lina Abaref, who is Executive Director of the Arab Institute for Women at the Lebanese American University. Lina brings a strong feminist activist orientation to the Institute, promoting education and research to advance social and policy change. She has published and spoken widely and was only one of 2 Arabs to be listed as Gender Equality Top 100, the most influential people in global policy. Lina can't be with us today and sends her apologies, but we're thrilled that she's sending us a video message to highlight her solidarity with our issue. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lina Abirafa. I'm the Executive Director of the Arab Institute for Women at the Lebanese American University. I'm sorry I'm not with you all live today. I'm very enthusiastic about this topic. I appreciate this conversation and look forward to hearing all of the interesting things that will be discussed during our deliberations. A bit of background on the Arab Institute. We are 48 years old, making us the very first in the Arab region and one of the first in the world. We cover the 22 Arab states and work at the intersection of academia and activism and fight relentlessly for women's rights and gender equality, advancing social change and policy change in the region. So you can imagine we've got a lot of work to do. So when it comes to something like a conversation on gender stereotypes, I think those cannot be understated, because what happens is stereotypes lead to active discrimination in the home, in public space, in legislation. These continue to marginalize and victimize women and girls, and that has brought the situation that we have today. The reality is that there's no country in the world where women and men are treated equally. Gender equality is something that we have not yet achieved. And we need to actually move faster on it. And one way to do that is to change the way that people think about and understand and negotiate gender roles and responsibilities, women's rights, what it means to be a woman, and what that, how that can align with the new ways that the Arab region needs to evolve. So if we're looking at what's happened in the last 1 year, the context of COVID and the pandemic under which we are all suffering, there have been a couple of pervasive issues that have come out. I think it is something that has given both challenge and, in an unfortunate way, opportunity. So in terms of stereotypes, the idea is that firstly, women are safe when they are at home. And that's been something that we've all been subjected to, the idea that lockdown is where we stay safe. But the reality for women in the Arab region and around the world is that home is not always safe. So combating that kind of impression and the idea that home should be safe, when we know that 1 in 3 women and girls worldwide are subjected to violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, other, leaves a lot of room for improving the way that we disseminate messages and understand what it means to be at home and who should be staying home and what home should be. For me, it is unacceptable, entirely unethical, and it is the greatest crime of our time that women cannot be safe in their own homes and on the street and in public space and in political life. So that idea of why that is allowed, why it is acceptable for women to experience violence in the home, why it is even remotely tolerated as a private matter, for me is something that is that hopefully has been a part of the discussion during the COVID pandemic, and now we understand perhaps a little bit better what women experience in the home and how we need to change that and change the way we think about women in that context. The other aspect of it is talking about women's roles In terms of unpaid care, women do all of the domestic labor, caring for the children, the household, the elderly, the sick. They are the social safety net in the family and in the community. And now that everybody is stuck at home, there is a chance, and this is the silver lining, very remote, but there is a chance, especially in our region, for people to examine those kinds of roles and distribute them more equitably. Because we are all sitting at home, we are all working, we all have to do our share of household work, of the labors that keep the domestic front in order, perhaps more so now than before since we're spending so much time at home. Child rearing, caring for the sick, all of those things are not inherently female. There is nothing about these hands that makes them better at washing dishes than anybody else's hands. And I think that idea, that ultimate kind of redistribution of our work, and also the ability to work from home, meaning that there is flexibility, there's a more family-friendly kind of work environment because you can integrate your work life and your professional and your personal life, which was prohibited before. We existed as if we were in a bubble. All of those kinds of things present an opportunity to combat some of the stereotypes that have held the region back. So women's labor, women's bodies and bodily integrity, addressing violence against women, addressing women's unpaid labors and their care burden, all of those kinds of things. What I have been asked to address is role models, and I want to end on that one point because the role models are in all of us. It's you, it's me, it's every single person who is out there doing the work, talking about it, living a life at home, on the streets, or anywhere. You start to model those kinds of things and society will change. Unless we see it as every single person's responsibility to model that good behavior and to combat those stereotypes and to end them where they start, it's unlikely that we'll achieve anything at all. So with that, I encourage you all to find the role model within you, and good luck today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Talina, for those inspiring remarks. Before I turn to the panel, let me just re-emphasize to everybody who's joining us that this will be a very interactive session. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, which you can please post questions that you have for the panelists. There's also the chat box, which you can provide input into. Please also use that chat box to give your commentary on the conversation. Gabriella mentioned that this is part of shaping a roadmap, and we will take everything away from this conversation, even if we don't get to your comments on the chat, to feed into the roadmap for this new global initiative as part of UNESCO's work. Aminetu, can I turn to you first, if I may? Lena just outlined some of the key stereotypes and challenges in the region. One of the things I'm aware of about your work is particularly the focus on climate justice, and I wonder if you would like to talk about that, or also just to reflect more broadly on what you see as some of the key issues around gender stereotypes in the Arab region that need to be addressed. Thank you. Yeah, Aminetu, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, and I am so happy to be part of this consultation. So as a climate activist, we know that it is really, really difficult for us as women to work correctly in a good and a smooth environment as a woman. And the main stereotypes, gender stereotypes we are facing here in Mauritania is the violence against sexual violence and also physical violence on women. We have a problem of a mindset. Mentalities need to be changed because despite the evolvement of the women rights and girl rights, we still have many lack in terms of in terms of the protection of the women and the girls here in Mauritania. For example, we have a law project against the violence on the violence against women and girls. This law project hasn't been yet, hasn't have a vote. We need to vote it on the parliament, and many parliaments are against this law because of religious, I think, religious causes, and because we are an Islamic republic here in Mauritania. So, and also we have our traditions who doesn't help a lot, and it is the main, it is the main issue here in Mauritania. Girls are not in schools with, if you see the percentage of the girls in schools, it is very low. The percentage is very low, still very low, despite the many how to say it, the many, despite the government is doing a lot, but we still need to change the mentalities. For example, when a girl when a girl has her baccalaureate and she needs to go to college abroad, it's a real problem here. Many of girls doesn't have the chance to go abroad to continue their studies because of the mindset of their parents, of the culture sometimes, despite the evolution. And in terms of climate change, how climate change is affecting women and girls here in Mauritania. As you know, Mauritania is a Saharan and Sahelian country facing desertification, land degradation, and the women in general in Africa are the main workers. The women are working on the field to produce food for their families, and also they are contributing in somehow to the development of, to the economic development of the country. And with this current challenges like desertification, land degradation, women are very impacted. And it is normal if the women are not empowered financially, even if they are facing violence, they won't go anywhere because they still dependent from their from the person who is violenting them.
Aminata, sorry, I'm going to just interrupt you there. Actually, would you mind just quickly summing up so we can move on?
Yeah, and that is the main problem. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much, and really appreciate you bringing the issue of climate justice to the table there. It's exceptionally helpful. Anmar, can I move to you, and just a reminder, sorry, to speakers, because we do want to try and get through as many contributions as possible, to please try and keep your comments to 3-4 minutes. Anmar, given your work on sexual reproductive health, would appreciate your reflections on the key gender stereotypes and challenges in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, team and everybody. Good morning. I'm really glad to be with you in this very important consultation around the stereotypes that affects women in everywhere, and with the specific of this conversation and consultation on the Arab world. As a white peer network and as activist working in the field of sexual and reproductive health and rights, I would like to move the focus and the challenges and the issues to the comprehensive sexuality education. And we all know that domestic violence and violence around women that has been increased within COVID time, but also the situation regarding sexuality education remains the same, but also the young ladies and the women as a main key problems remains is the silence of talking freely about their bodies, their sexuality. They even can go to doctor, but they also feel ashamed or afraid to express enough about their sexuality. The problem here is that, in my opinion, this is not only women issue, this is the community issue, because when the women losing their confidence in themselves and losing their dignity, that means the whole generation and also the young ladies and their kids and the whole community will automatically be affected, because as I believe that the human is a social being, and every issue that affects the human, such as women, man, kids, or old people, will affect the whole community and its system. The main issue in Iraq that sexuality education remains a taboo, unfortunately, because of the traditions, because of also the implementation of the law. We don't have a problem with the agreements, with the law that's supporting the women empowerment. We are part of the United Nations as a member state. When I'm talking about Iraq, we do have a lot of agreement with the UN system when it comes to the generation equality, the Region Declaration of Action, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 when it comes to peace, women in peace and security. But the main problem here is the implementation of those agreements. Because I do believe that there is a huge gap between transferring all these experiences from the international and the regional level to the local level. We do have a lot of challenges to transferring all these experiences and to advocate for this agreement and law to be implemented on the grassroots level. Unfortunately, till now, women in Iraq and young ladies in Iraq, they cannot talk freely about their bodies and their sexuality even with their partners, because nowadays boys and men think that women educated enough sexually should not talk about their experience and their background, because if they speak about their background, the guys think that this woman is not fit for marriage. And as far as they will share and they will be open and honest to them, it will cause a lot of problems, stigma and discrimination, and the women, they might be also killed from their families. And this is really a huge issue that women cannot be free enough to speak about their life and their sexuality. And also the issue in the education system, and the teachers are not well prepared. All the educational curriculum in the school is not enough for the young ladies and the young women to understand the elements of how important to share and to speak freely about our bodies and the sexuality education. These are the issues, and I believe that the solution, when it comes to prove to prove the value of living together and to understand the differences and to give spaces, and the spaces are nowadays unfortunately limited within COVID times to understand all these issues together. I will stop here, and we can come back also to the solution and what we are doing in order to enhance the skills and the knowledge regarding sexual education in Iraq and also in.
Great, thanks very much, Anmar. One of the questions that's just come through, and there's been some comments on the chat, is around legislation. And I think so one thing for the panel to think about is that the Arab world does have legislation, but so why are we around women's rights? It's obviously could be better, but it nevertheless exists. So why are we still having this conversation? And I think you've mentioned the challenge of the implementation of that legislation, and Mar, but it would be interesting to have panelist reflections on, is implementation, is legislation in itself sufficient for this challenge? Hanai, can I turn to you next? You may want to reflect on this question, given your experience around social protection, or more broadly, would be great to have your thoughts on the key challenges around gender stereotypes in the Arab region. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, the problem with stereotypes is that I think we kind of misframe them as an objective reality. Stereotypes are the product of a real division of labor, a real situation of scarcity that existed, that organized people's lives. And then these products, these tools went of, the flare up is due to commercialization. These are models of social relationships that have been tremendously commercialized and then reinserted into real life. So they're not real. The gender division of labor is no longer real. It's no longer the case. I regret that the panelist who's not here projected a very neat picture of women at home, men in the workplace, a lack of a division. These things are really not real, and I fear that we are reifying them by giving them some kind of credence. And therefore, we need to step back and understand the continuous process of producing gender stereotypes and what sort of real material relationships they're embedded in. These material relationships could be us as developed people. The market for talking about gender stereotypes is such that it's become profitable to try to change gender stereotypes. So that my first point is really we need to stop a little bit and ask what is giving the breath of life to these continued models of inequality, because that is what they are. They are models of inequality that are informed by persistent scarcities and material competitions and commercialization. Having said that, laws don't work if the laws are about women, not people. So I fail to see how we can end violence against women in a violent environment. I fail to see the fairness in talking about women without addressing the persistent inequalities and the persistent deficits in rights. And that is the problem of the Arab world. We seem to think that it's all right to talk about women and women's rights and ignore the context in which these rights are being practiced. One of the attendees was asking about female leaders. I'm afraid to say that we've got a lot of bad female leaders. So I don't want to perpetuate the idea that once a woman is in power, then she will be a feminist. There are many non-feminist women and there are many feminist men. So I would hope that the first thing in this consultation we try to address is what gives the breath of life that perpetuates stereotypes, and do we want to reify the notion of stereotypes even if it's in the name of changing them? Thank you.
And I thank you very much. You really brought to mind for me the writing of Judith Butler, who talks very much about the fact that gender is only real to the sense that it's often acted out. And so thank you for putting that question on the table. And I guess I would pose back to you and to everybody that said that production of gender stereotypes is creating very real lived inequities in the Arab region. And how do we deal with those inequities? And what is UNESCO's contribution to that question? It would be great to have your thoughts on. Salma, could I turn to you from your background? Greatly appreciate your perspective on the challenges that the region faces and thoughts from what others have said.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I wanted to I mean, I agree with a lot of what other colleagues said about the position of women in MENA region, and especially young women, because they have largely been confined to roles, that are prescribed by patriarchal norms and excluded from public spaces, whether through forced isolation or different forms of harassment, violence, and silencing. And it's clear that women's personal freedoms are significantly constrained, and their participation in the economy, in politics, and other public spaces in the regions remain one of the lowest globally, and COVID-19 crisis was really came at a moment where already all those structures for participation and are already fragile. So maybe I will speak about 3 main points. I don't want to come back to what other colleagues said about the increase in terms of violence against women, but I will speak more about what happened in the online and digital spaces. As you know, in the region, there are already in many countries shrinking civic space happening already before the COVID-19. So, for example, in a country like Egypt, where state surveillance is massive and where there are a lot of, violations to right to organize and to associate. Then also there was Oxfam did a research in MENA about in MENA region about digital safety, and it was clear that so gathering experience from different feminists in the MENA region and what changed after the COVID-19, and it was clear that in the region there was a lot of forms of violence that were against women because they were trying to express themselves on different platforms, social medias, etc. And this also show that even if the public space is shrinking in some countries, but also the online space is not safe for women, and that's why there are a lot of investment now in terms of self-protection and digital investing in digital securities to protect activists and women's rights defenders in order to be able to engage safely, and the online spaces also highlight the patriarchal social norms that are as I said present in physical spaces, but also very different kinds of this violence are present in the online spaces. Another point is about the burden of unpaid care work, and it was clear that this is one of the biggest issues that the region faced and women faced, what at least don't have data on unpaid care work is to gather this data and really build strong evidence-based research to showcase that this burden is one of the main obstacles to women economic empowerment and women participation in the economy. Yeah, I don't want to take more time.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Salma. That's really helpful, and thanks in particular for emphasizing the kind of patriarchal structures within the digital space. Alanud, can I bring you in here? It'd be great to have your perceptions on this question. One of the questions that's come through is the kind of the challenge around, I don't want to change my religion, but I want to challenge social and gender norms. And I know that you lecture and speak on religion, so you may want to reflect on that, if possible, around, people clearly want to remain religious, which is very important for them, but want to question the ways in which gender stereotypes are manifested. What do you see as the key challenges around this issue in the Arab region?
Well, thank you for this thought-provoking and very difficult question. And I would start with the idea of who controls the religious text, who interprets it, and then who disseminates the positioning of women and gender norms and gender stereotypes within a community. And so we may all be very proud and happy with our identities as Muslim women, but then we have to make sure that that is not then used to justify acts of violence and discrimination against us. And I don't see being a Muslim woman and asking for more equality as being mutually exclusive. So I don't really see where the problem in that lays in. I think it's more of a question of interpretation, and which interpretations should we decide that are fitting for this day and age. Looking at the conversations that we've been having today around women, in the particular work that I do in Kuwait, I'm the chair for the Abolish 153 campaign, which looks at ending honor killing legislations in Kuwait and the wider area. And I also co-founded a platform called Mudawi's List to help women running for elected offices in Kuwait. And I think that these two issues go hand in hand. If we want to eliminate violence against women, I think we have to make sure that there's greater political representation for women and for those who put women and community issues at the core of their political demands. I do agree that not all women's representation means feminist representation, but I think having women there is a very important cognitive issue. There are many biases and stereotypes, insidious and very extrovert practices that limit the engagement of women in our communities. And I think the only way that we can break through is to have greater representation for women. And the same way that the representation for men is diverse, we have men on all parts of the spectrum, men who are extremely religious and conservative, men who are tribal, men who are sectarian, etc. I think that there is room for both substantive and descriptive representations for women, and it is very important because this brings us back to the discussion of role models. And it's important to have role models who are not just sort of from the establishment or from particular elites. It's important that we have role models who are from all segments of the society, role models who may not be part of the mainstream, who may not be part of what the regime is putting forward, and role models who may not come from privileged backgrounds. So I think this is extremely important to see. And if I may be allowed to really bring this into the Kuwaiti experience, we have only passed a domestic violence law in Kuwait this summer. We passed a domestic violence law in Kuwait in August 2020. And it was only put through because some of the women involved in the civil society space had been lobbying for it. And I'm proud to say that our organization was one of them for the past 5 years. And so having civil society space where women can engage safely is really important. And just having a legislation passed makes a big difference, because now you can go to the judiciary and you can go to the police force and you can lobby to open a shelter. Imagine in this day and age and during the COVID crisis where cases are going up all over the world, we still don't have a domestic violence shelter in Kuwait that is functional and that is taking in. So I will leave it with that. Right now we have zero representation of women in political office in Kuwait, 15 years after getting our political rights. So there are real structural problems that we need to look at closely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alanu. Thanks for reinforcing the issue of structural challenges, which I think will be a question that we want to come back to. One of the things, just to kind of mention, that has been talked about in a number of the other consultations is the fact that women themselves can also reinforce patriarchy because of the patriarchal structures in which they exist and the limitations of movement that they have. And so I think it's interesting to reflect on that are women acting in that way because they want to, or because society necessitates that structures of power require them to be less pro women's rights, perhaps. So I think that may be an interesting conversation if necessary. Can I come back, Amineh, to you? And I want to move the conversation on to solutions. So if panelists have any thoughts on solutions to this challenge, what they're aware of, the work that they're doing or others in the region, that would be great. And then I'll bring you in, and then if anybody else from the panel wants to continue the conversation, please put your hand up.
Thank you, Theme. And I've been listening to all the interventions, and something just like the women leadership. Someone talked about the women leadership. I truly agree with the person who said that all women are not feminists. That is true, because here in Mauritania, we have a law project on the violence against women and girls, and many of the parliaments are women parliaments are against this law because of some tradition and cultural mindset. So for me, even if we have women represented at the parliament, or women in some big positions, responsibilities, sometimes it doesn't change anything, because if that woman, that leader who is a woman is not defending the women's rights and the girls' rights, it doesn't mean anything. We saw many examples here in Mauritania, unfortunately. And so to overcome these issues of the issue of the violence against women and girls, we need to work on the mindset. We need to bring the girls to schools. We need to educate people. And sometimes education at schools is not enough also, because if the teachers are not giving a lesson on how to respect, why it is important to respect women and girls, and to explain to the young girls why it is important to defend their rights and to speak up when something is not normal, when they are being harassed or intimidating. So it is important to educate the girls and the women that it is their right to speak up and to defend their dignity. And for the solution, I think it's all about education, and we need to see what the teachers are giving us lessons, or the courses in the schools, because we can have also some teachers who are extremist and against the teachers who are not defending the women's rights and girls' rights. They can also play a negative role in this process.
Great, thank you very much. Would anyone else from the panel like to come in on questions of solutions? Anmar, go ahead, and then Hanai, I'll bring you in after.
Thank you so much. Well, I truly believe that to continue empowering the women as a solution and to inspire them to refuse what is happening to them. Because I believe that ending the stigma and the violence around women are the key to achieve peace in the world. As a solution and as a young person, I do believe that we as a young people are really the critical actors in accelerating the global promises and the agreements around women health and women empowerment And so I do believe that's one of the important key elements when it comes to the solution is to the young people meaningfully engage throughout the whole processes as a decision-making body, and we to be recognized as not beneficiaries, but also as a meaningful partners in decision-making processes related to the review process, to the implementation, to the design, to the planning, at all levels. And this is one of the solutions in my mind. And the second is to continue raising awareness through peer education, because I do believe in peer education, and to provide the safe spaces online and offline for the young ladies and for the young people, because this is the issue of us. This is not the issue of the women. This is the issue of everybody. So we need to address this issue as issue of us, and to advocate and to seek our spaces in the decision making, not only on the local level but also on the global level. And the third point is really to restructure the work of the UN system. Because based on my experience, I'm sorry to say, there is a huge gap between the country offices and the regional and the global offices. All of you know that everyone wants to work on the safe side, but this work on the safe side, it's really, really killing the process. Like safe side means to remain silent. Safe side means to save my jobs and not to talk, because I have observed a lot of UN people, not only on the decision-making processes when it comes to the government system, but also on the UN system. I have been facing a lot of local problems. Some of the system itself, some of the people working in the systems, they are homophobic. Some of them they are refusing working, for example, to enhance and to give the space for the LGBTI community, young ladies, to work on these elements. I do understand there is a lot of problems, but really the experience from the international and the experience on the regional level, it's not the same on the grassroots level. It's really to go on our base, which is the ground, and to ensure that those people on the grassroots level are aware about all these processes and what steps they have to do in order to advocate for their rights and to seek for their rights as a human by the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Anmar. Just a reminder to participants to please keep posting your questions, and we've been able to address some of them, and we'll come to some others in a moment. Let me bring in Hanai, who would like to contribute on this question. Thank you, Hanai.
Oh, the two, it's Hanya, but it's okay.
Sorry, Hanya, I apologize.
No, it doesn't make a difference. Two suggestions, brief points, and also to pick up on Caroline's posted answer. Two solutions. One is to know ourselves, really, with the dismal condition of social engaged critical research that is close to daily lives. That is, I think Ammar was talking about the LGBTI community. To actually know what is happening in our countries is always, at least for me, maybe I am biased, I am a researcher, that is my métier, that's my, really we are imposing on people the stereotypes of what we think inequality, violence, victimhood looks like. And there's no harm in refreshing this understanding new forms of leadership, new forms of suffering. So that's my first point. The second is that feminist engagement, feminists should be setting agendas. I appreciate that feminists can't be all parliamentarians or all leaders, but surely a gender changing effort needs to have an agenda, and the agenda needs to be set by those most concerned, those most committed as a moral cause. So feminists mean men and women of all backgrounds. And so this stifling of a feminist movement in some of our countries doesn't mean that in an obvious way women are suffering, because yes, we do have better laws, we have and appropriation of what gender justice can look like by various powerful people or elites or institutions. And that's okay, that's fine, that's better than nothing. That's great. I fully respect and support that, but I think it must also enable the existence of a feminist movement that sets the new agenda. And let me conclude by just giving you an example. Personally, I've been involved in social protection. It seems like quite a tame sort of field, but it's something I'm quite proud of feminist social protection, of delivering welfare and distribution to women, changing one aspect of the state in that respect. But now we need to look at new forms of social protection. For example, protecting young mothers, protecting that sort of social benefits that cover maternity rights and maternity needs, looking at preventive care and women's right to health, not only as curative, but what we have seen in the COVID situation is that the poverty and weakness of free universal public health, infrastructure, services, and knowledge is what is putting our communities and countries at risk. So I think that this agenda setting by feminists, representatives of civil society, is something that is missing in the Arab world, even in the Arab world's best facade of having engaged in power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hania. Could I just ask you a quick follow-up question? One of the things that you just talked about was that men themselves could be feminists. We haven't really talked about that in this conversation so far. We've spoken a lot about engaging women and empowering women, but how do we engage men as part of this conversation? Obviously, there are men who are perpetrators of violence, but how do we engage the silent majority to believe that this is their concern? Sorry.
Very, very briefly, as someone who truly believes in gender justice, as I think we all do, if there is a crisis in the Arab world, surely it's a masculinity crisis. I mean, I'm talking about socialization. I mean, violence is a symptom of a crisis. It's not an act of identity. Men's health, my goodness, we are very comfortable with the fact that young men have no access to any universal health information or care or services. So that is really an injustice. I mean, it's the focus on social protection and on women. Of course, women are poorer and they work less and so on, but the looming crisis in the future of work in the Arab world in general, because of this low innovation, low productivity, because of climate problems and so on. So I think that UN Women had he for she, this idea of men as champions. It's wonderful, but it assumes that men are in a good place. You know, he for she assumes that I'm in a good place, like I'm a guy, I'm regular, I've got no problem. And now I just need to be told how to be nicer or more equitable or a better champion. But I don't think that men are in a good place, and I don't think that so perhaps that addressing the problems, the crises of men in families and in the workplace is something that a feminist agenda needs to adopt. So let me be clear here. I'm not saying that we should not be researching or investing or supporting women. I just think that we really do need an inclusive gender agenda, because we are dealing with symptoms of something that is rooted in a changing material world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Alanud, I'll come to you next, and Salma, then I'll come to you after.
I think that the way that we need to think about solutions is holistic. So we need to look at the way that women are being portrayed in our curriculums, in the media. We have a sexual harassment movement happening right now. And in the media, there's a lot of victim blaming that's allowed. And that's something we need to tackle. And I think it also has to be with tackling legislations. There has to be serious penalties and incentives for countries to revisit the legislations that have guardianship underpinnings, allowing discrimination against women. I think what Gabriela said is very important. Why do we have honor-killing legislations at this time and age? Why isn't there a movement to get rid of them, get rid of disciplinary violence, get rid of the kidnap and marry law? A lot of these legislations are actually, colonial throwbacks. Why do we still have them? Why does the world tolerate this violence against women? So it may be time to look into the relationship with donor countries within the UN system as well, and to take a very serious stand with both incentives and penalties towards those that don't change those legislations or don't make a move to really get them off their books, because I see no real reason why they should exist, and only weak justifications that we are peddling to each other about why they remain in place. Certainly it will take longer to change social and cultural practices, but surely we can take a universal stand against entrenched legislations.
Thank you very much. And Salma?
Yeah, definitely the policy change is, for me, one of the most important things to happen in the MENA region. And you know that, for example, Tunisia, they enacted a very progressive law and very protective law to eliminate violence against women. And now, at least there is a kind of lot of work to really ensure that this law is implemented. But other countries are still, as Alanoud mentioned, have very, very discriminatory law. And for example, in Egypt today, with the Me Too movement, there is a lot of, organizations trying to now think that there is a kind of political momentum to have a very comprehensive law to eliminate and to protect women from all forms of violence. So for me, holding the governments accountable and over their obligation to protect is very important. The second thing is for civil society. I think that we need to continue supporting and facilitating safe online and offline spaces for solidarity and mutual support for women, raising awareness and provide training around digital safety, protective tools, but also how also to provide, to give access to information for women regarding this. If I can come back to the online spaces, also holding the big tech corporations accountable, because there are, of course, that while different corporations have made their ethics and also to try to moderate and make the space safe for women, nevertheless there are a lot of stakeholders that are perpetrating harmful social norms online, and that the control is not, and the monitoring of this space is not enough. And also I want to say something about Henya regarding, you were speaking about social protection. We need to be aware that the region is going also through a crisis, and with the austerity measures and the trends that we are seeing, there is a less and less investment on either education, that is a sector very important for women, but also in terms of social protection, etc. And we think that one of the biggest issue is to fight inequality in the region is to really face this austerity trends and also explain and advocate towards more spending to protect women access to either social protection, but also accessing education and healthcare. And this will be one of the most or the biggest challenge for what we call recovery policy now in the MENA region, how to make women part of those or at the heart of those policy change in the region, to be sure that they are protected from violence, but also protected in terms of accessing healthcare, accessing their sexual and reproductive health, etc. So yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Salma. I'm going to pick up a couple more questions that have come through and then come back to whoever wants to respond from the panel on those. And then we've got about 50 minutes left. So just a reminder to everyone to keep their comments short. And I'll also ask panelists when you respond if you could give your recommendations as well to UNESCO. What should UNESCO take forward as a key initiative or plan from this action? We've touched on some things, but just to kind of flag a couple of questions that have come through. I think, Hania, in response to your comment, the question of, yes, men have challenges, but men are also in positions of power relatively. And it reminds me of the concept of men being both powerful and, you know, kind of the privileges and powerlessness, which has been written about. But any thoughts you have on that? Let me just raise a couple of questions and then that you may want to. So how do we engage men but recognize that they still remain in a position of power is one? What role of research? We seem to have a lack of research on this issue in the Arab region. How do we increase our research? Do we need more research is the second one. I think a broader question around, you know, is legislation enough? So I think there's some comments about, well, we need stronger legislation, or, you know, we need to improve laws and policies, but also, you know, is it sufficient just to rely on legislation, particularly around violence against women, for example? So any thoughts on kind of, you know, clearly there's a challenge of implementation, but, you know, is it really about legislation, or is it about legislation as well as social change, I think is a broader question. And then I think, Salma, maybe touching on some of your comments, but more broadly, comment earlier from someone saying, well, that's fine to talk about kind of digital access, but many people don't have, and women in particular don't have digital technology at home. And you, I think, touched on the digital divide. So, you know, how do we address that? And maybe quickly, if anybody has thoughts, I think a broader theme around leadership. And, you know, you've all talked about feminist leadership, the need to, but I think, you know, how do we move this conversation beyond the interpersonal space to really think about the structural question, and in particular, which has come through all of the consultations, of how do we advance women's leadership practically in a kind of really concrete way in societies. So you don't have to respond to all of these, but just to flag those questions if anyone would like to come in. Hania, do you want to start us off?
Thank you, Tim. Of course, men and women are both powerful and powerless. And in fact, historically, the denigration of women as the weaker sex or as the weaker social role was accompanied by a veneration for women. Gaia, the Earth Mother, gods, priestesses, queens. So this denigration and veneration link applies to men and women. And I think that part of the point I'm trying to make is that to talk about the intersectionality of gender. So to talk about, you know, famously, we say that, you know, every rapist has a sister, and every rape victim has a father. And so it's these roles that are sometimes eclipsed by the gender, the violent event itself. So we're always eclipsing multiplicities of gender roles. And all I'm saying is bring that into the picture to complicate, to diversify, to bring in more voices into the conversation. But I hope I am wrong, but I see it from, I'm a medical anthropologist by training. I see huge burdens of sexual dysfunction amongst men. I see huge burdens of ignorance or lack of awareness or understanding of issues of gender sexuality amongst young men. And I'm talking about privileged men, not underprivileged men. And so I think it's a feminist obligation to be inclusive in problematizing gender stereotypes and to focus on the intersections, not to maintain the silos. I have one research, the more the better, frankly, and the more people doing research. But my last comment about leadership is that I think leadership is an obligation and a relationship between leader and led. So leadership is not an artifact in itself. It's not something that you just, gets handed to you, or you run in one election and so on. We need leadership that is practiced by leaders who've earned the right to lead and who are accountable to a constituency. And so, again, the intersection between leader and constituency is as important as the actual fact of leadership. Thank you.
Hania, thank you very much. One quick recommendation that you have for UNESCO, Hania?
Well, UNESCO research.
Great.
I think that this issue of agenda setting is important. So that would be a sort of an agenda that is rooted in social contestations and practice by multiple partners. So that would be my recommendation.
Great, thank you very much. Let me turn to Alan Noods.
I wanted to tackle the issue of legislations. Of course, we need a holistic approach, as I said, but if we don't start with legislation, then there's no protection for survivor advocates. There's no protection for activists. There's a lot of pitfalls. So we need to start with legislations, whether those legislations are legislations that are quota-led, that ensure representation of women within the judiciary, within the private sector, within the public sector, or if they are legislations that criminalize hate speech against women, they criminalize a certain language when dealing with women, demeaning language against women. And of course, legislations that would ensure that discrimination against women doesn't exist. And in the Arab world today, we have discrimination in nationality laws, we have discrimination in labor laws, we have discrimination when it comes to protection from violence, even in healthcare, even in living conditions. So I think we have to start with legislations and then try to implement them and have a simultaneous conversation about cultural change, but we can't expect to have organic cultural change and a more inclusive society while the legislations remain discriminatory against women. And my recommendation to UNESCO would be to focus on all the discriminatory legislations against women as a first step, while choosing one to highlight and really go after in the cultural space. And I feel like, hate speech against women, embedded norms within hate speech, the way women are discussed on the media as sexual things, or as, being of less mental capacity than men. And this is casual sexism that happens every day on our airwaves, in the way things are reported, etc. So I think that really deserves a campaign of its own. And it is very culturally powerful to go after the way that women are being described.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Salma, can I bring you in on recommendations?
Yeah,
thank
definitely.
you.
I mean, for me, women's leadership is not about only, all the programs about capacity building, etc. It's women's empowerment is about, ensuring that women gain power. I mean, and have more power in order to control their lives, their resources, etc. So it's about challenging the structural barriers that keep women from achieving all those dimensions of women empowerment. And for me, the structural barriers are about, policies, but also work more on culture and social norms. And for me, the recommendation would be to invest more in research, evidence-based research, alternative research also, indicators how to measure women's empowerment, but also to support youth-led groups and youth-led movements who are bringing, all these young people are bringing new norms to the public sphere and expressing themselves differently. So I agree with also what Hania said about supporting feminist movements, supporting youth-led groups, because we are having new ideas about expressing their sexuality, their beliefs, their political orientation, etc. And I think organizations need to be connected to what is happening, as I said, through research, but also through supporting concrete initiatives and actions. So this is my main issue. And last thing is about less focusing on men as role models, because they are also sometimes taking the light and showcasing that the solutions will came from men and not from women. And I think men have already enough spaces. So I'm not for excluding them, but there are a lot of different strategies to engage with men and boys through education, through raising awareness, through having mixed group when we are working on strategies, etc. But in terms of communication and in terms of campaigning, there is a big issue about saying, for example, that for care work, we need to showcase a man that have, overcome gender barriers and is more equal, have an equal attitude, etc. And this showcase that it's the way or to how to improve things will go through men. So we need also to try to, when we are working on messages, when we are doing campaigning, to be sure that we are not doing more harm to gender justice and to women's rights. So I think we need to also have this in mind, and especially to be connected to what young people are producing in terms of content and campaigning, because this is for me what is making things changing deeply in the culture, but also in terms of social norms.
Great, thank you very much, Sama. Anmar?
Yeah, well, shortly for me, I would like UNESCO to support the adolescents and girls, and including the victims from violence, to take part in the Generation Equality Forums that is upcoming in Paris and Mexico, and to bring all the showcase their stories and they to be shared and to be in the center of the process. And UNESCO to join the contribution of the UN Women and other United Nations system.
Great, thank you very much. Aminatu?
Yes, thank you, team. I would like just to add on Hania and Alanoud comment about legislation. We have the legislation in general. We have many mechanisms to fight the violence against women and all these stereotypes around it. But we have the lack of the application. The laws are not applied, and it's all because of the corruption and many other factors the region or our countries are facing. So my recommendation to UNESCO will be to plead and support the facilitation of the access of the healthcare for women and girls, and also the access of a quality education if we want to fight those stereotypes. Thank you.
Great, thank you all very much. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Yana El Baba from UNESCO's office in Cairo. Yana, you've heard what everyone said. You've heard these recommendations. Would greatly appreciate your closing remarks on this, and then I'll say a final few words. Thank you. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim, and thank you really to all the esteemed panelists for their interventions. I've listened really attentively to what they said, and definitely that I could observe that there is a web of factors that are really causing us to be in that maybe a vicious circle of discriminatory legal frameworks that continue to prevail in many Arab countries, and they continue to reinforce the women's subordinate status and promote those gender-based stereotypes. At the same time, these persistent gender stereotypes are actually among the main factors contributing to the violence against women and the gender gap in all spheres of life. So basically, how do we break this vicious cycle and all this web of factors? And specifically, I was thinking, what could UNESCO do within its mandate that it's presently not doing or not doing enough? But just a couple of my own thoughts based on what I heard is what is the issue of image, okay, and what constitutes women image, because the concept is not clear in my own mind. And where is the boundaries of that concept versus, for example, elements of our own cultural heritage? Is this part of the image of women that we want to keep or that we want to change? And is there also one image that we want to have, or images with an S of Arab women that we want? Is there a consensus, and then is it fixed, or this is an image that changes over time? So these were some of my own questions that we could perhaps get to answer. But finally, just to close, maybe on what UNESCO could do as a cross-cutting maybe action based on what I heard, definitely the issue of reforming gender studies or gender research programs is definitely was mentioned by all the panelists. And there is definitely difficulties that face gender research because it's simply not considered as an important topic. So there is a sense of perhaps denial or a belief that since it's not a problem, then there is no need for us to research it. And we definitely need better gender studies and research programs. My second, perhaps, area that I would like to suggest really, and that people maybe don't know a lot on as part of the work of UNESCO, is that UNESCO has developed this versatile tool that we call the Future Literacy Lab. And that this tool actually allows participants to liberate their imaginations, really, to rethink the nature of problems, of social problems, and to really challenge the assumptions that shape their images of the future and hence of their actions today. And I really thought of this tool as an option for us as we want to drive this social change that we spoke about. So we can definitely, as UNESCO, work to offer these platforms, these inclusive platforms where different groups of men and women, and mostly youth also, can imagine and reimagine the gender role and the images of women we want. Finally, of course, at UNESCO Cairo, we stand ready to provide all possible support that we can, and please do reach out to us for further ideas. Back to you, Tim.
Jana, thank you very much indeed for those great summary remarks. Never easy to come at the end of such a fruitful conversation. Thank you. I want to just begin the ending of this conversation by thanking the panelists and asking us to please give ourselves and everybody else a round of applause. This was a really fantastic conversation. I feel like I could talk to you all for another 2 or 3 hours, but I'm sure you need to get on with many other things in your life. But thank you again for taking time. Thanks to everybody for their active participation, for the great questions, for the great engagement. As this is our last conversation, I just want to reiterate that we'll take all these inputs away. We really would appreciate staying in touch, not only with the panelists, but also with everyone who's participated online to shape this new UNESCO global program. Can I just thank in particular UNESCO staff that have worked tirelessly to make all of these consultations happen, Anna Maria and Garance in particular, and their colleagues, as well as the translators. So thank you to everybody. Please keep in touch. And I just want to end and leave you the words of Saudi women's activist, Manal al-Sharif, who said, "How beautiful it is to live in a world with no walls. And I think what we've heard today is how the walls of stereotypes are significantly restricting not only women, but also men within the Arab region. And how do we break down these walls? And that's the journey with Manal's call that we would love to take with all of you. So keep up the fantastic work. Thank you so much for your participation and contribution, and look forward to staying in touch. Thanks again.